Okay. I'm not sure if you hear that, and it says I'm starting the recording now. Okay. So welcome to the lecture. I think I will make a start. There may be a few more people to join a little bit later. And Kan, you still have your hand up. Do you have anything to ask or?
No,
Okay.
thanks.
Sorry, the other Kan. Yeah. Okay. He has lowered the hand now. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay. Or
Yep.
okay. Okay. Yeah. That's good
Yes.
to know. Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. And as we mentioned, I guess I gave an introduction of the module last week. We mentioned a lot about JavaScript. So, and also I mentioned the framework we're going to be using is called Vue. And Vue is still also JavaScript, but it provides some extra functions which make life a little bit easier. So today we're going to have a look of doing a very simple app. And we're going to first try to do it using JavaScript, which I assume all of you would know how to do it. This will just be like a review or kind of warm up if you haven't used JavaScript for a while. And then we're going to do exactly the same app and using Vue Js. And then you can see the difference of using these two. And when we're doing the Vue JS version, there's lots of things might not make much sense yet. That's completely fine. We're going to go to those into much more details in the following lectures. Okay, and so as I mentioned, so most of the work we're going to do in this module will be using JavaScript, and you should have learned JavaScript in the second year web development module, and that's probably at least half of that will be related to JavaScript. And if you haven't used JavaScript for whatever reason, or you just need one some way to review, there are many free books. And the book I would recommend is called this one called Eloquent Javascript. So that's the link in the lecture slides. Okay, so it's a free book and it covers everything useful about Java. So you can see these are the content, so the chapters there, and you can click any of those, for example. Let's say, okay, and so for example, we're going to using lots of objects and arrays, and you can go to the chapter, and it will
Hello?
cover what is an object and arrays in more details there. Okay, for example, this is how you define an array. Okay, and so this is a book recommended if you want to a refresher or you're not familiar with JavaScript at all and you want to learn. So that's the book I would recommend. But in this module, we're not going to cover the basics of JavaScript and in much detail. We might mention them when we start using them, for example, and what is an object, what are the methods in arrays, etc. But we're definitely not going to start from the very basics of JavaScript. Yeah, and so today we're going to use a to-do example and try to review how JavaScript, or sometimes I'll just simply say JS for short, works. Okay, and so this will be mostly a live coding session, so you're welcome to come along and follow, and if you can, and maybe it will be a little bit too fast in terms of actually, because we will not have too much time to wait for you to actually code. And the following lectures will be similar to this. There will be lots more live coding sessions than before. So I try to show you how to do it. And because all the lectures are recorded, you should be able to and review later on. And you can also try to um, and coding along, say try to copy the code or the exercise yourself as the lecture going on. and you can tell me if you think it's going too fast. You need a slightly bit more time, and in the Zoom, just by click the go slower button in the Zoom. Okay, and I'll start introducing different tools we'll need. And I mean, the first one we'll need to talk about is the code editor. And so for this particular module, I would recommend using Visual Studio Code. Uh, can I see a show of hands in the Zoom list just to see how many of you have used the Visual Studio Code before? Uh, please click yes if you have and no if you haven't. Okay. Ah, very good. I mean, at least for the people who already clicked, most of you already heard of Visual Studio Code before. A few haven't. Okay. And so assume maybe it was already introduced by some other modules and before, which is really good, I think. And so just a quick introduction about the Visual Studio Code. And first, it's free and open source, and so it don't cost anything to buy it. And it's actually made by Microsoft and used to have a kind of bad name, like it's used to be this like evil big corporations, but I think it has changed a lot in the last few years, and since they changed the CEO, and actually it owns GitHub now, which is the online open source software repository. I'm going to use that later in the module 2. And actually, I think not long ago, GitHub, Microsoft actually has the most number of an open source project or softwares on GitHub. So it certainly changed a lot from a very kind of corporate company to a much more open kind of, at least appear to be user-friendly type of company. And it's available on all the operating systems. So Visual Studio Code runs on Windows, Mac, and the Linux, and many different versions of Unix. So you should, doesn't matter what operating system you use on your home computer, most likely you will have a version running for you. And it's actually used by many professional developers. And so if you talk to people working in the companies, and many of them actually using Visual Studio Code in their daily life, of course, they will be using lots of much more advanced functions, but and it is more or less the same tool. Okay. And one of the reasons I like Visual Studio Code is it presents a good balance between the features and the size and performance. So I'm going to show you the next slide. Uh, okay, so in these slides, I listed some of the popular editors, and on the x-axis, and it shows the size of the editor. So that just means the file size of the software, and so the axis is slightly, I guess it's like the reverse of usual direction. Actually, the large is on this end and small is on this end. So usually we want something small. That means it's faster to download, faster to install, take less storage on your computer, but most importantly, it's faster to run. So it will take less memory and faster to start, etc., etc. And then on this axis, we have the features. So the features, that means different functions that the software can help you to do. And one of the important things for the editor is so it can support, for example, it can recognize you're doing JavaScript programming, can provide specialized support. For example, it can support you, recognize you're using Git, then it can provide support, etc., etc. So in generally, we want to more features, which is on the top part of the this axis size. And for the plain ones, and where you have to do most of the things yourself, and it's less desirable. And so ideally, we want something here. So something small, so it's faster to run and open files, but has lots of features. But in the real world, it's usually a compromise between the size and features. So for the small size ones, I list a couple here: Sublime Text and Notepad++. I think most of you would have known Notepad++. And Sublime Text was actually the one I would recommend maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So these are the small and fast ones, but relatively speaking, they have less features and probably not say poor, but definitely not as feature rich as these ones. Some of the important ones are not in there. And there's these ones. And so I would put these three together. And so if you're doing any Java developing, then Eclipse is probably the first one people would recommend. And NetBean is very similar to Eclipse, very much initially designed for Java development, has lots of features, very powerful, but also on the other side, they are very big as well. I think WebStorm would be a kind of improved version of Eclipse, and it was improved designed to and support web development. And then also Atom, which is a little bit smaller than these two, sorry, these three. And Atom is actually made by, I think, by GitHub. It's open source as well, but it's still quite a bit larger than this. I think Visual Studio is kind of at a nice spot, and it's relatively small, still larger than these ones, but it has almost the same amount of features as these ones, and definitely more than enough to cover what you need in this module, and probably in your first job as well. There's also another editor I used to recommend. It's called Brackets. Again, it's slightly smaller, I think slightly smaller or even bigger than Visual Studio Code, but not as feature rich. So now I will definitely recommend Visual Studio Code. Okay, and so this is what we're going to try to do today, and just including implementing something called a to-do app. And so it's relatively simple. So this is what the end result would look like. And so you have apps, you might have some text or title. And in this case, we call it my to-do list. And then you have a text field, which allows you to add text. So you type in your task here and you click add, and then the task is get added to the list. And as you add more and more appear at the bottom. So, and for now, we're not worried too much about actually saving these tasks. I mean, if you really want, you could say try to save this in local storage. So, but it's completely fine. Or for today, we're not going to save the tasks in any way, which means if you refresh the page and all the tasks will disappear. Okay, and yeah, so we're gonna just do this now. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're gonna first do as a JavaScript or plain JavaScript version without using any libraries or tools like the Visual Studio Code. And then we're gonna do the same again in Vue and with Vue, and just to see how that different is. Okay, so yeah. So that's the version, but I can actually type it as we go so you can see how it works. So first I'm gonna start my Visual Studio Code. Okay, it's starting with something different. Okay, and So if you never used Vue Studio Code before, when you first start, you would see something like a welcome screen. It's not here. So you would see something like this. For the first time, you come to, so it give you some information, and, and today we're going to start straight into actually creating this one. And so first, and it will usually ask you to, okay, maybe a quick introduction of different parts of the Vue Studio Code. And the most important things are these 5 things on the left. Obviously, there's the menu. And so the first one, and give you a list of files. And usually it will likes you to open the folder and it likes to work in a folder where all the files are. So we're going to do that straight away. Let me see, gonna choose a folder on my computer. Okay, I'm gonna create a new folder on my computer and then open. Okay, and then you can see now it shows demo, which is the name of my folder. Currently there's nothing there, so it's completely fine because it's an empty folder, we don't have any files yet. And then there's the search, and this is a Git. We're gonna use it to later on. And this is for debugging and installing extensions. So we're probably not going to need the debugging part until we go to the Node.js, which is the second part of the module. But we do need to use some extensions. Okay, and so because we don't have any files yet, and so first we want to create our file. So then it comes the second most, or maybe the most important thing, which is also shown here, is the important feature of Vue Studio Code is you don't have to hunt through different menus to find all different, say, commands that you need. So you can just use this one here. It says Shift Command P. So that's how it works on Mac. And on Windows, it's slightly different. I think it's Control Shift P or something. But if you press these 3 buttons together, so for me, I'll have to hold down Shift command and then press P, and you should see something like this. And then you can just type in any command you want, and it will do a full text search in all the available commands, and even those ones not available in the menu. So for now, I want to create new files. So I just type in new file, and then you can just choose this one. You can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to select which one you want. And in this case, I just want a new file. Okay, and it ask you to give a name of the file. You can see on this side, and I'll type in index.html. So this will be the index file we're gonna need to put all the code in. Okay, and then this one now starts. You can see everything here. And one of the nice thing about the Visual Studio Code is it will try to kind of, how do I say, automatically complete the code for you, so save you from typing too much, but also it can save you from typos. So sometimes you mistypes, which can cause everything to not run, whereas if auto-completed, it's almost always correct. So, and Visual Studio Code support kind of a fast typing language called Emmet. I just typed it there. And can I again see a show of hands? And how many of you heard of this before in the poll? Okay, yeah, please click this. Okay, yeah, I guess not many people have heard that before. So essentially, again, you can just type everything by yourself and letter by letter. But Emmet is just one way to make it type this slightly faster. For example, if I Google very quickly, Emmet, so this is what it looks like. And it allows you to type things and very quickly. And often the things I would use is something called an Emmet cheat sheet. Someone made a very concise but useful list of the things that you can do. So try to make it slightly bigger so you can see. Okay. And see, so these are the examples. For example, if you want to create a nav element, inside you have a URL element, and inside it again you have an RI element. So this is what it looks like. You have a nav, inside you have a URL, and inside you have a list. And instead of typing all these, you can type nav, this kind of greater than, or the arrow left, right arrow, and the URL and then RI. It will create this one for you. And if you use plus sign, it's give you something which is not nested, just siblings. And for example, you can do multiplication. Say if you type li times 5, it give you 5 of these. Okay, I will start to use some of these as I go on. And so you can see I'm not going to cover everything, but it's actually not that many. And it will make you type much faster. So I'm going to introduce you the first one, and it's the exclamation mark, which I probably use a lot. And you can see, so the Vue Js code now already recognized it's Emmet abbreviation. So basically, it recognizes Emmet code. What it does is give you the common things you need when you first started the HTML5 page. So if you just enter, so that's everything there for you. And so you could change this one, which is actually to setting the display for mobile device. And we don't really worry that too much about that now. And instead, we're gonna just say change the title to say, we're gonna call this a to-do app and then save. Okay, and this comes to the next thing. It's not showing up. And so currently, and I assume you're all familiar with what we have done so far, and it's just creating an empty HTML page. It doesn't have anything yet because the body part is empty, but it should have a title called the to-do app displayed in the title bar. So now comes to the next part, the part of the Vue Studio Code, very useful. Is actually this button, the bottom one on the left-hand side, and you can actually set it on the right if you want. Okay, and what it does is allows you to install other things which is already does not come from Visual Studio Code. And because Visual Studio Code, for example, is not just supporting JavaScript and web development, you can use it for any other languages. For example, say Java, Python, or even C. And let's say if I want to do some Java development using this tool, I can just type in Java. And then you can see all these different packages people developed for Java development inside Vue Studio Code. And you can click any of them. Okay. And you can see this is particularly called extension called Java extension pack. It has developed by Microsoft. So that's the developer. So Microsoft made it. It has been downloaded more than 5 million times. And it is like a 4-star out of 5 ratings. So it's a reasonable one. But if you look at the version numbers, it's 0.10.0 in the sense, usually that means it's not into the kind of fully ready mode yet. For this class, we're going to need something called a live server. And so because I already installed it, you can see this is currently listed under my installed. So that's the one. And so what it does is it allows you, so basically it runs a local HTTP server, and every time you make changes to your file and you save it, you don't have to refresh the page. It will reload the page in the browser automatically. And also this is useful, for example, when you need to load a local file. For example, you need to load a CSV file for your page. And if you open the files directly from your, say, Windows Explorer or Finder in Mac, it does not allow you to load any other files. Whereas if you load from the live server, it should work. Okay, and so if you don't have it, you want to install it now, and so you should see an install button here because I already installed, so I have the option to disable or uninstall it. For anything that you haven't installed, for example, it recommends me to use install Docker, so you should have a button here instead of uninstall or disable, should say install. Uh, so just have that running, and just have that installed in your code editor. Then you can see here, if you can see live server, you have the option to disable or uninstall. That means it's already installed and running, and it should be also listed under installed. Okay, so let's close this tab. Okay, let's go back here now. Now, once we installed the live server and we want to use it, and usually it will show up here, and I'm not sure why it is not, but as we said before, you can always use the Command Shift P or Control Shift P, and you can type live server, and you can choose an open with live server, then it will open the files in live server. Okay, and so if you can still see my screen, and you can see this completely empty page, but you can see the URL there. So basically that's on the local server 127.0.1, and that's the port, that's the files we just did. And you know this is the files we created in the Vue Studio Code, because you can see the title here is called To Do App, which is the title we're given here. We call it To Do App. Okay. Let me see. So obviously there's nothing there yet. I will try to leave the, let me see, my screen is big enough to show, so you can see. I'll make it smaller. I'll make this go to this side. I can, okay. And other small things very useful is, and if you click these icons once, it will go to that tools in Vue Studio Code. And if you click it a second time on the same tools, it will collapse. So give you a little bit extra space to work with. And okay, and if we go back to the lecture, you can see, okay, sorry, this is a bit small. So this is the things we want to do. So the first thing we do is probably just add this one. I'll probably just use an H1 and just add a title to it. And then we add these things. Make it a bit smaller, yep. And so again, so when you type in Vue Studio Code, and you could type, say, H1, but you can also just type H1, it will recognize. Again, it says this is Emmet, you can recognize this is H1, and you press enter, and then typing the title for my to-do. Okay, let's call this my to-do list. So this is meant to be this part of my app. Okay, and now you can see there's this kind of black dot here. That means there's new changes to your code that's not saved yet. And you can see this page is still empty. Now I'm gonna save the file. And so instead of going to file and save every time, I'm gonna just use Command S. I think it will be Control S on Windows. But I actually just do it now for the first time. Okay, I saved it now. You can see this part is already changed, which you will see my to-do list will show up on the page now. Okay, so I think this probably is too easy for any of you, but just to show how to use the live server and Vue Studio Code. Okay, now we go to the next part. We can add this one, which is a text field and plus a button. Yeah. Okay. And anyone knows how do you add, say, the text field and the button to the page? So this is kind of quick review, or this is something you should have studied in the second year module. Anyone? Okay, someone you can type in, and someone say input and button. Yeah. Okay, very good. And someone says, if you don't want to submit, don't use form. Okay, yeah. Someone typed the form as well. Okay, very good. Oh. Okay, just go back to our own page. So again, so first there's the option to use a form element. And so there's a possibility you can put the form and then add your text field, let's say text field and button here, but that's not required, as I said, and especially in this case, we are not going to use submit, so we're not going to use a form. So instead, we're going to just keep it as simple as possible. We need a text field, which will be the input. Okay, and you can already see you have lots of different options you can do. In this case, we just want to text. Okay, and so again, so this is Emmet is working, and you just type in input column text and give you something predefined. Again, we might not even need name or ID. We might need name or ID. I can just leave that for now. Again, if I save now, Control S, and you see on my page, there's now a field. And now, let me just check make sure I don't run over time. Okay, we're already kind of close to halfway through. Okay, and we also want a button, and so we do a button. What does button D do? But that means default. Okay. So we just on the button, and in the button we say, I think just add. Okay, now that we have these. So we have a text field, so we have the button. That's all we need actually for the app itself. And so if you come back and you look at here, and because we're going to start with empty list, so we're not going to create anything yet, only a text field and add button. So that's all it is, completely fine. So next, we can actually do something. So something is after the user should be able to type in something here. Let's say task 1 and click the add button, and that something should appear below. Make a list. In the example, we show this is a list. Okay, and so that has to be part of the JavaScript, and you can't just do everything of those and using HTML only. And in this case, We're not going to use a separate JavaScript file, just save me from switching between, say, HTML and CSS. And easier for you to see, but say sometimes, usually it's a good practice to separate HTML from JavaScript. But for this very simple and short ones, so you will need a script tag to say, okay, these are my JavaScript files. What I want to do is say, when I click the add button, I want something to happen. Okay, so if you remember this, okay, yeah. So instead, okay, so Rupak made the comments in the chat. So instead of using button, you can also use input type equal to button. That's also give you something similar, and either will be okay in our cases. So because you need to reference the button on the page, and I think what the way you learn so far is to first give this one a ID. Let's say this is called add button. Maybe I'll use capital. And then in the script part, you would just say when you first need to refer to this one. So you say, okay, so again, so the first thing here, and how many of you have seen the let? Can you vote? Can again using the yes or no in the participant list? Yeah, okay. At least the people who clicked, most of them have seen that before. So previously you would all definitely see var, which is kind of like the old version, and the let is kind of a new version of let because that's in how do I say, because you can, instead of using var, you can use let or constant. Constant will stand for something constant, which you're not allowed or supposed to change afterwards. And for everything else, you can use let. So if you remember, to refer to element, you use document dot get element by ID, and oops, we have, let me make this even smaller so I can, okay, get element by ID, and this one will be my ID. So I'm gonna reference to that. I'm gonna just to call it add button. So now this JavaScript variable is referring to or pointing to this button on my page. So essentially is this add here. Okay, and so once that, we're gonna say, I think is add button dot on click. So what does it say? When this button is clicked and you want to do something, okay, and usually this will become a function. It will have, so the function or the actual code that does something will be inside the function. So what you could do is probably previously would say function because it doesn't have any parameters, and your actually code goes here. Okay, again, so we're going to use something a little bit more simpler. So we're going to use something called arrow function. So it does exactly the same thing. Let me delete these ones. So instead of typing this, you do this one, this, and this. So this is exactly the same as a function without name or parameters. So basically, this is a function without name, so we don't need to name. And in this case, we also don't need any parameters, so that's an empty bracket. The only new thing is this little arrow here. Once you get used to it, and you will find familiar and say save you a little bit typing. Okay, and so what we need to do is say once the user clicked this button, we want to get the values of what the user typed in here, and then add that to a list, say below somewhere here. Okay, and then the first thing is we need to get the values that user typed in. Again, so we need to get value basically from this input field or element. So what we do is we gonna again define a new variable. Let this call task equal to document get element by ID. I need to give it ID first. Let's say I could just call this one task. Okay, and then because I'm not interested in the text box, I'm interested in what the user typed in the box. So I'm gonna just do dot value. So this should give me the value of whatever the user typed in there. Okay, so I could keep going, but usually as a good practice in the when coding is I already wrote quite a few lines of code, and you want to test just to see if this is working. Okay, and so one of the easiest things you can do is now you have the task, you can just to see if it works properly, you do console.log, so which is output something onto the console, and I just type out task. So for now, so the reason I'm doing this one now is I can test if all these codes so far works before I move on. And very likely it's not going to work the first time. And then it's much better when you have less code, you fix out whatever problem there is already, make sure it's working before you add more ones. Okay, and once you did this, what happens is when this one is add, it will not add something to the page yet, but it will do a console log to display whatever user typed in here. Okay, so hopefully that's working. And as we're saving here, the page is already updated here. So all JavaScript is already there. I don't refresh because it doesn't change any of the text. So you can't really see anything visually different. So to open up the console, so you just right click and choose inspect. And so basically this is the Chrome developer tools, and there's many other ways you should be able to do that, access it, and there's shortcut keys and etc. Okay, a bit small. So what we're really interested in the console, and we go there. Some errors, so that's warnings, that's completely fine. And so what I hope for will happen is after I click the add button, and it should have a message pop out here says new task. And if that happens, that means whatever we typed in here is working properly as we wanted. So I click add task. Okay, you can see new task is there. That means this is working. I clicked a couple more times. You can now it shows say new task is used 3 times. Okay, so that we know. For that we know all this code so far worked as we wanted. Now we go to next step. Okay, so we know we have the values user typed in here. We actually wanted to add it to the page. So the first it needs some place to add to. And so I'm gonna just use a simple unordered list because that's kind of what we did in here. It's very small. So I'm gonna make this an unordered list. And each time there's a new task, I'm going to just add as an item or RI element to this page. Okay, so first I'm going to just create the unordered list. Actually, and you can give it an ID straight away if you want by just using hashtag. Let's just call it a list. Okay, and again, you can see Emma to recognize this. And if you enter, it gives you an unordered list ID equal to list. Okay. Oh, I don't. This is complete fine. Again, because it doesn't have any items here yet, so you will not see anything different. But we can do something here now. We can comment out this part because we don't want to always display, because that's just to testing if it's working. We can turn it back on later if we need it. So what we want to do is we want to first create a RI element and then add that RI element to this list. Okay, so I'm gonna let equal to document dot create element. So you can see, so that's another nice thing of the Vue Studio Code, and it recognizes you are doing HTML coding and you're writing JavaScript code. It understands what this document is, understand what different methods document object has, and then you can just choose them. Okay. Okay. So I have Aslan raised his hand. The question is, where did you get item from? Okay. And so if you're talking about this item, we are not getting it from anywhere else. We're creating a new one. We're kind of creating one out of thin air. And the item itself is just to reference to the newly created RI element. You're going to become clear. Okay. So you need a list item. And so this part will create a new RI element, something you would similar to you would manually type here. Okay, but instead we're going to create it using code. So we're going to create a new one called this, and then we're going to reference this using item. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. And if it does, please lower your hand. Okay, now we have an RI, and so the next part is say we want to give the text inside RI to whatever user typed in here. So in this case, the inside text is task1, and we here want to give it to whatever user typed in here. So we're gonna instead of gonna do an item dot, I forgot now, is that inner text? I think it's inner text equal to task. And so you can see here, the task refers to whatever value is typed in here. Okay, and now that will become the inner text of this item, which is just created here. And finally, we just need to get this unordered list element from the page and add these items we created to the unordered list. Yeah, and so to get that from the page, it's the same. And use our favorite document get element by ID. So we know the ID is just called the list. Yeah. And then finally, and last step, we add the items to the list. So you add, I think, append child. Okay. Yeah. So for example, this saved me from checking append child item. Okay, so in theory that should do it. So this one give out us a reference to this along the list, and this line would add a new child. It's called items. You can see that's the one we just created, which has a text of user typed in. Okay, let's say if I task 2, ta-da, okay, so it worked. You can click multiple times, and you can say task 3, and then add, it give you different things. Okay, and for example, you might want to clear this field, for example, afterwards. After you click the add button, you can also add it in here. Okay, but we're gonna just and stop there for now. Okay, do we have any questions before we move on to the Vue version? Okay. Okay. So people asking the difference between the inner text and the inner HTML. And so here I use the inner text. So essentially, if you use inner HTML, and whatever you typed afterwards will be treated as HTML code. For example, you can put some, let's say, okay. Okay, so first, now we do inner HTML, and if I type in em new, and I add, you can see it will show up as new, but it's italic because these were interpreted as HTML code. Okay, but if instead I'll type in here as in the text, I can't remember now, in the text, and I put that in here again, you can see it will show up as text. Yeah, it will not be interpreted as HTML code. It will not say no EM stands for italic in this case. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Okay, yeah, so now we're gonna do the Vue version now. And so that's my version, and the actual lecture slides you would see has the quite similar, but not exactly the same version as well. And now we're going to do the Vue JS version. And in terms of function, it will be identical. So you have a title, a text field, a button. And it actually looks slightly longer because some of the things you have to set up. Okay, so as we said, the functions will be identical. And now I'm gonna switch back to the actual code. I'm gonna do just, okay, first I'm gonna start a new file because I don't want to just leave this one here. I'm gonna create a new file and I need to save it. I'm gonna just call it index view.html. So it's have a different name. You can see the other one is here. And now I want to see the the new index.view file. So you can just type in here. It was index, and you can say index view.html. And you can see it's empty because it's an empty file. Okay, and say live load is complaining. So it's not possible without body or head tags. Okay, so I need to put something in first. I just do the same thing again, and if you missed it, so just exclamation mark, and then you choose type enter, and so I'm gonna call it to-do app Vue.js version. And if you look at here, I haven't refreshed it yet. Okay, you can see it's a to-do app Vue.js version. Okay, I've got 2 hands raised. Okay, so first is in terms of the book. So yes, and for each module you only get 1 book, but if you have multiple modules, you have multiple book. The other ones says, do we have to install an extension for Vue.js? Okay, I'm going to cover that in a second. And Vue.js is like, the way we're going to use it is similar to other libraries, for example, jQuery or Bootstrap. You don't need to install extension in Visual Studio Code. You just load it as a JS file into your code, that's all. Okay. Okay, so for the people who have not received the book, and you need to go check your emails, and there should be an email asking you to fill out the online form, type with your name and the home address, or basically where the book should be sent to. Once you fill out the form, they will send you the book to your whatever address you put in. Yeah, and so the textbook is Vue.js in action. And I was hoping to get an electronic copy, but not possible. And so they are sending out the textbooks, physical copies of books. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and now we come back to the actual app itself, and we can see currently empty, but at least the title changed. So there's one thing we need to do first is we need to yeah. To load Vue.js, and as I said, just as a normal file. Okay. So I forgot the exact URL now. I'm gonna just go back to the slides to get the URL. Okay, so that's what you need. So that's the URL you need. So that's a copy of the Vue.js. It's online. I use this one. There's a shorter version one, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. So we're gonna use that. Okay, so that's the thing. So basically, that's all you need to do to start using the Vue. I think the shorter is a shorter one. I'm pretty sure. Okay. Anyway, I can't remember now, but I'll just use this for now. Okay. Also, I'm gonna just wrap the text so you can see it slightly better. Okay, and that's all you need to do. And then and so if we look at the previous code, we can do all these ones. And for the actual Vue app, we need to do one extra step first, is to define something which including all the parts that will be used or by the Vue app. So usually it's just a div. In this case, I could just give it, just call it app. Obviously, nothing gonna show up yet. And inside, we can easily have the same. We can have the h1, the input, and the button. Do we get the list as well? But for now, let's just get those three first. Okay, I'm gonna just reformat the. So this is other thing quite useful in the Visual Studio Code. For example, this kind of code is not formatted properly, and you can just format your code. Use the Command Shift P or Control Shift P. You choose Format Document, and you can see it automatically format this one nicely for you. Ah, yes, yes, yeah. The unpack.com is the new one. Okay, and so Ignace was asking, and you want to install Vue globally, and then you don't need the script. Yes, that's definitely one way you can do, and it's also possible. But that involves, say, installing Node.js and then install, which we will not cover until the second part. So at least for the first part, we're gonna just use this way by loading the files using a script tag. Yeah, I'm gonna do. Actually, I like the shorter version, the unpack one now. So I'm gonna use the. Hopefully, the unpack version would work. Okay, and so read the blocking. It says being blocked. Didn't have that problem before with other things. Okay, it seems just to be the slash at the end, which made all the difference. Okay, let's see. And if this doesn't work, we go back to the longer version. Okay, again, to ask Ignace questions, and you don't have to. And so long as you can get the view somehow and into your code, and if you want to use it installed using Node.js globally or locally or some other ways, you have a Vue.js file inside your local directory, that's also all fine. Is the device width the same as using 100%? Okay, we're not going to answer that for now. That's a little bit off topic. And also we are kind of running out of time soon. So I want to go back to the code. Where's my mouse? Okay, and so you can see this is our Vue version. You can see to do Vue.js version. And we add a few things here. This is just copied over from the previous version, so it's all there. Okay, and then this part will be similar, and the difference comes in when you're starting to write the JavaScript code part. And again, you still need a script tag. So these are all my JavaScript files. And okay, equal to new Vue. Okay, and so this is like the first thing that is different. You try to, and even this part might not be necessary. You can even just say new Vue. But here we give it a name anyway, so make it easier to reference later. And you say new Vue. So the view is now an object. It existed because we load this or the Vue.js before, so it understands what the view is or what the view object is. And then you have the bracket. So basically, whatever is inside the bracket is the parameters for the view object. And in this case, the parameter itself is an object because I'm using the curly bracket. Okay. Okay. And then, so the first thing, the most important thing is say you have to tell Vue which part of the code it's gonna work with. So you're gonna have to use EL. In this case, we're gonna work with this div. We're gonna say EL and hashtag app. Okay. So what it does is it tells Vue say you're gonna work with this part. Okay. And then next one, let's see. Okay. So then we want to get the values from the input field, and instead of what we did before, say you get a, how do I say, you get an element by ID, and then you get the, sorry, the value of this element. We're gonna do something called a V model. Let me just double check if I'm doing it correctly. Yeah. So you do something like this and just called V model. Which is this one here. Okay. Ah. Yeah. So this is gonna look slightly different now. Instead of this, we just do V model task. Okay. And you started to get warning now. Say it says method task is not defined because then you need data and task. Okay, so now make it happy. And so data is another attribute of Vue, and again, it itself is an object because it has this curly bracket, and it stores all the data for this Vue app. So in this time, we're gonna have something called a task, and this will be linked here. So essentially, whenever this value is changed, it will be reflected here. And similarly, whenever here changes, it will also reflect there as well. Okay. And then the other thing now is to do the interaction part, is to add. So basically, when something happens, you want to have an action here. So the way to do this in Vue.js is again slightly different. You say v on click equal to something. So v on click is a Vue directive. Sorry, v on is something similar to. So we don't actually need ID anymore. We say v on. That's a Vue directive for all the interactions. And for this particular one, we just want to respond to click interaction. So we say v on interactive. And you give it a thing called, let's say, called item. And again, we might get some errors here. And it might complaining, say, invalid handler because add items doesn't happen, is not there yet. And okay, so for that, we need another kind of part of the a component of the Vue, and it's called a method. And we're going to have add item. This will be a function. basically an empty function. Okay. It's still complaining. You can see on the left-hand side, it still have the errors. Sorry. Okay. Let's see. So it's actually should be methods. Yeah. Hey. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. So also plural form. Yeah. And so basically now we have defined a function. It's called add item. That means when this button is clicked, add item will run. Okay. So first, if you remember, because we have this part, and it refers to this div, and that means everything here will be able to interact with all the code inside your Vue app. And so it's recognize add items is one of the methods inside here. Okay, just as before, we can just do a quick one here. Console log. Okay, and before adding it to the actual page, what I am doing now is say display this.task. So this will reference to this Vue app. I just want to display the value of task. So very similar to the test we did before. So if I type in something now and I click add, so it says undefined. So basically when you run this, it says undefined. Yeah, I think if I use app.task, okay, yeah, add item. Is it? Okay. Let's try. Oh, okay. So yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And so we defined add items as a function which doesn't have parameters. So currently it just display something like this. And so if you click now, you can see, and this got displayed here in the console log. Okay. And so, okay, I have a question now. What does this mean? Okay, this is slightly tricky. So you can see that this shows as blue. So it recognizes like these words, new or let. It will recognize as a special keywords defined in JavaScript. So it usually refer to the thing that it is in. So here it's inside this view object. So it will be referred to view.task. So it will basically pointing to this one. And depends on the context of the view and will be referring to different things. And previously, actually before I do this, what I did is actually I create a function, and in that case, that this will refer to that function it was in. So that's why when I use this.task in that context, it doesn't work. Okay. Let's keep going. So this is actually can be quite tricky. So what did this get translated to? Usually translate to the parent that was in or the context that was in, but that's actually quite tricky thing. Okay, and so now we know this is fine, so that's okay. So instead, we're gonna want to actually add uh, items to the list, similar to before, right? So we need, let me see, is there any better way to do it? I can't quite remember now. in the code. Okay. Yeah, and so I was just looking here. So the way we adding items onto the page and is very similar as we did before. So we need to first create a new items equal to document dot create elements, and it's li, and then we will let item dot in the text equal to, so instead of getting everything, we can just say this dot task. We can just refer to this one because we use the V model, it will capture the values there. Okay, and then we have to add our unordered list as well. Is there any easy way to do this? No, it looks like we still have just to do the hard way. Unordered list, so we could just call it list. And we say document.get element by ID and the list. And then, sorry, equal to this one, and then list dot append child item. Okay, I'm going a little bit faster here, just aware of the time. And this is very similar to what we did here, essentially the similar thing. And so we create, this time we first created the element, and we'll make this text equal to this dot task, which is this one, which is linked to this input field here. And then we get the list, which is this one here. Then we add the items to the list. Okay, let's save. And let's see if it's task 1, add. Okay, task 2, add, etc. Okay, so you can see it's working now. And that's more or less the same thing. I think in the actual code examples, I can also, for example, if I want to clear, I can say this dot task and equal to 0, like to empty, save. So what it does, it will clear out this value, which also clear out this text field. So if I do it again, task 1, add, and you can see now that becomes empty. I can type in something else again. Okay, we're going to talk more details about how this works a little bit later. Okay, and then now let's get back to the actual slides. So that's the full working code in the slides, which is very similar to what we just went through. Okay, so and the two are not that different. And the Vue Js version, the main difference in the Vue Js version is just because we include the Vue as a JavaScript library. And say, I think was Ignace asked before, and it's later on it's possible to include a Vue using the command line interface or the CRI, but the way of that works is more complex. It creates a default and file structures for you, which can be slightly overwhelming at the beginning. So that's why we're not using it. And for now, if you look at the code, and so the one with Vue.js is not necessarily shorter. So if we just look at this one here, And so in this version, the Vue version, we had 39 lines of code, and here we had 28. So actually, the the index version is actually slightly, sorry, the plain JavaScript version is actually slightly shorter, at least for now. But that's because mostly this is a very simple app. And for the more complex ones, for example, the online shop ones we're going to build for the coursework or the demonstration, and the power of Vue will all start to show. Okay, yeah. And so now that's the textbook. So that's the textbook people already asked, and you need to fill out the forms. And if you can't find the email ask you to fill out the online forms, it's probably in your junk mail somewhere, and you still can't find that. And you might ask one of, if you know anyone else in the class, they would have received the same link, or maybe contact Uni Help, it will tell you. And okay, and it's also all the code examples in the lecture is actually online here. So if I go there, so the Vue Js in action code, so all the code examples are in this GitHub repository. So if you need to use it, it's much better just to get it from here rather than say and get it from the book, or take a long time just to type yourself. Okay, so that's it for today. And so in terms of reading, we cover the first chapter of the book and introducing Vue Js. And we used a much simpler example, which is a to-do app, whereas in the textbook, if I remember correctly, they use a more complex example of using a calculator. But they give you the process is very similar. It just we use the simpler examples. Okay. Okay. So, is any questions before we finish? I can see Stanislav still have his hands up. Assume that might be from something before. Okay. Yeah, if you have questions, is device width the same as using 100%? Okay, so we have a couple of minutes. So the device width is used to set when you display the pages on the mobile device. Okay, I'm not going to be able to explain everything in detail here, but generally, when you display on the mobile device, you might want to start by, say, showing part of the page. For example, you have a main part of the, for example, showing only the main part of the page. And but for our purpose, when you display it on a computer like this, here, 100%, no, that's the device the width. It will set by the actual device. So that is the width of the device. How do I say? And the width will be set as the width of this viewport. And currently, that width is the device width. So basically, for example, if I'm looking at my computer, the device width will be from the left to my actual monitor or screen to the right. And you can choose other things. You can say browser width, browser window width. Then it will give you the size of the browser window. It can be smaller than the actual device width or other values here. So basically, this is a value. And then initial scale is equal to 1.0. That means no scaling. Okay. So there's questions about people don't have a group yet. So please come to the lab and then we're going to find you a group at the lab. We will not be able to do it now. Question says the lab next week is going to be something like this. Just have a look over the lab sheet In the lab, it will be mostly people working in the groups, working on a task quite similar to this one. Okay, and if you don't understand something we use it today, like the V model, V on click, or all these different, say, methods, data or L, we're going to cover them in the following lectures in much more details. Today, just to get you a feeling. So if you don't understand what they mean, so don't know how to use them yet, that's completely fine. And we're not going to use them in the lab exercise either yet. Okay, I think that's all we have time for, and we will stop there and hope you to see everyone next week. Okay, let me first get my Zoom. Oh, where's the Zoom? Hello.